25 years of probing space, scientists who helped launch Britain into the space age have returned to the Isle of Wight to visit a site used for testing rockets. And they marked the anniversary with a special launch of their own. Holly Lewis has the story.
Launch isolate. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch.
It was hardly the latest space technology, but it brought back memories of the roar of rocket engines on the Isle of Wight. Black Arrow was built and tested on the island. 25 years ago, it blasted into space in Australia. It was too dangerous to launch it from the island then, and bad weather meant it was too dangerous to launch a replica at a local school today.
If we had launched today, we would have had a recovery on the land. It would have sort of drifted inland, and it could have caused a problem to people or property or livestock, and I wasn't prepared to take that risk.
I'm pretty disappointed because I really wanted to see a rocket being launched. I would have liked to seen it, but as I can't.
During the late 50s and 60s, scientists at Highdown worked on Britain's first research rockets. They were used to put satellites in space. The whole project was one of Britain's best-kept secrets.
We weren't allowed to talk about it, and nobody really knew what was going on. And so there was high security the whole time. We weren't allowed to say anything, or everything was classified, D-notices and goodness knows what, and we were locked up on the site and not allowed to spill out and tell anybody what was going on at all.
Over the last 2 days, members of the original team have been gathering in Highdown for a reunion.
Lovely to go over old times, all the work that we did. The weather outside is a typical Highdown weather.
Just to catch up on old times. A lot of people here haven't seen each other for 25 years.
The test site is now derelict, and memories of Highdown's links with space beginning to fade. But the anniversary has prompted a new generation to investigate, and the excitement of discovering their rocket-fired past more than made up for the replica being grounded. Holly Lewis on the Isle of Wight for Meridian Tonight.
Now, space pioneers were reunited today in celebration of the successful launch 25 years ago of Britain's first satellite, Prospero. They met on the Isle of Wight, where the engines for the Black Knight and Black Arrow rockets were built and tested. Here's our Isle of Wight reporter, Chris Connerbeer.
3, 2, 1, let's go!
Youngsters learning the basics of rocket technology just a few miles from the spot where Britain once had a leading role in space research. It was here, high above the Needles, that Britain tested the engines for its rockets, resulting in the successful launch from Australia of the satellite Prospero.
Black Arrow was the very first all-British satellite launcher that actually also put a satellite into a perfect polar orbit. And it's still up there, and it's thought it will stay there for about 150 years.
Joining the celebrations by satellite phone from Sri Lanka was Arthur C. Clarke.
Because you're going to live so much of your life in the next century, which could be one of the most exciting centuries in human history.
It's really exciting.
It's nice. What about you?
I think it's good because you don't know what's out there.
Would you like to go into space?
Yeah.
You would. Anyone else want to be an astronaut?
Yeah.
To mark the anniversary, it had been intended to launch a 14-foot rocket 4,000 feet into the sky from here, the old rocket testing site. But unfortunately, there's a storm force 10 gale blowing and the conditions are just too dangerous. So the big rocket stayed in its sections and they made do with something a little smaller to mark the occasion.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. And there was the booster.
That certainly went up, didn't it?
Now, exactly a quarter of a century ago, on the 28th of October 1971, the UK put up its first satellite into orbit. The official British space programme had begun, and that's where it ended. Not a problem, though, for a nation of gifted amateurs. On Saturday, John Knopp launched his own rocket in Norfolk, which blasted to 4,000 feet. And earlier today, another Brit set out to do even better. Philippa Forrest has been down to the Isle of Wight to meet amateur rocket scientist Steve Bennett.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
The Americans had Cape Canaveral, the Russians had Baikonur, and we had the Isle of Wight. It was here, on this little-known, windy cliff-top launch site, that Britain conducted tests for her top-secret rocket programme. Now, for the first time, footage of those tests can be shown on public television.
Preliminary testing has now been completed, and the rocket is on its way to the gantry.
Britain's bobble-hatted boffins battled all through the 60s against the superpowers in the race into space. And 25 years ago today, that test programme culminated in Britain launching her first and last rocket into orbit, although that launch was from Australia in order to reach the correct orbit. The Black Arrow carried into space the first British satellite, Prospero, which is still up there somewhere. Even though it was a triumph, the British space programme had already been cancelled by the Heath government. They believed collaborating with Europe would bring more success. The Isle of Wight test base was left to rot. Black Arrow's designer was Ray Wheeler.
I came out here to this site, it was on a Friday, and congratulated them on putting a Prospero into a perfect orbit. And then by the Monday, although we had already known the project was cancelled, what we didn't know was there was going to be nothing afterwards.
Today, the very idea of ever seeing British rockets in space seems, to say the very least, optimistic. But a small number of amateurs still have the vision of flying the Union Jack in orbit. One of them, Steve Bennett, is pioneering his own rocket program and made the news earlier this year with a rocket that runs on a sugar-based fuel. And his space centre is here.
Hi, this is Mission Control, Duckingfield. We're sorry, there's no one available to take your call.
Steve is one of Britain's leading amateur rocketeers. He's launching his Star Chaser rocket to commemorate Black Arrow and hopes to get into orbit next year. What inspired you in the first place? What ignited this passion for rockets?
It's got to be the Thunderbirds I watched when I was a child. You know, I knew it wasn't real when I was 4 years old. I was watching it, plugged into it. I knew it wasn't real, but I wanted to make it real. I've got this dream and I want to turn it from a dream into reality. The Star Chaser Tempest is about 14 feet long. At the tail end is where the motor fits. The exhaust goes that way and the rocket sort of shifts that way. We've also got the fins down there, which lend stability to the rocket in flight. Forward of the parachute bay, we have the payload section. That's where we put any experiments that we want to put in there, electronics, camera, that sort of thing. And at the very end, we've got a heat-resistant nose tip.
So, Steve, you're a man who makes rockets in your front room. Does that make you a nutter?
Some people might think I'm a little bit eccentric, but things are really progressing now. I'm no longer a one-man band. I've got a small team of people, there are 15 of us, and it's coming together quite nicely. What I want to do on an amateur level is prove that I can get the things to work, get small satellites into orbit. Once I've proved I can do that, then I'll be able to go to the big boys and say, look, we can make it work, now give us some money and we'll build a space industry for the UK.
Steve's now graduated from sugar fuel to the same fuel used in the space shuttle. So, a couple of quick checks before he faces the final frontier, and it's off to the Isle of Wight for the launch. A few hours from now, this place will be transformed into a launch site once more after 24 years of disuse. And who knows, maybe that launch will signal the rebirth of a dream that faded all those years ago.
Hello there. Well, a combination of strong winds and heavy rain causing problems again today.
Especially for budding rocket scientists. By the time Steve and his intrepid team reach the site, a force 10 gale is battering the Isle of Wight. It's far too windy for the rocket to take off safely, and so they've no choice but to abandon today's launch. Perhaps this is why Britain has never taken off as a top rocket launching site. Steve and the team are forced to take refuge in one of the old Black Arrow testing bunkers. Not surprisingly, Steve is disappointed.
I'm a little bit disappointed because all the crew are geared up to watch this launch. We've put quite a bit of time and effort into it. It's cost quite a bit, and it would have been very, very spectacular. The scenery out there is stunning, and to see this rocket sort of fly out over the bay, it would have been really something to watch.
Well, even NASA postpones space shuttle launches when bad weather threatens, and it won't be long before Steve is back and the space race is on again.
And that's all we have time.
And mountain bikes.
Children have been helping celebrate the 25th anniversary of the last British satellite to be launched into space. They saw several amateur-built rockets being blasted off from a school near the former rocket test site in the Isle of Wight.